What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a look at Zero Parades for Dead Spies, an upcoming narrative title from the company, I guess you could say, that made Disco Elysium, and in many ways it's a game that is very much in that vein. However, to just address the elephant in the room before people start rushing to the comments about it, if you have somehow missed it, the situation around Disco Elysium has been very dramatic since about 2022. Some of the original creators of that game were fired. It was very dramatic. Many of the people that worked on Disco Elysium have spun off into, I think it's like 4 different studios at this point to make their own games, and as a result, the company that was behind publishing and releasing Disco Elysium isn't really made up of the people that made that game at this point. But ultimately, the point of this video is not to deep dive that situation, and so what I'm going to do here is basically talk about this game. Is it any good? What does it have going for it? Just kind of what's generally the situation there. So let's go ahead and get started with exactly that. Now, the way I'm bringing you this video is that Zero Parades here released a demo as part of the ongoing Steam Next Fest from now until March 2nd, meaning that if you are curious about any of this, you can in fact go play a little bit of it yourself if you'd like. But broad strokes here at the beginning, Zero Parades is an interesting title because there are parts of it that I think are interesting in terms of like the sort of spy situation that they've set up here and some of the interactions therein, and yet at the same time, while they have expanded on some features from narrative titles like Disco Elysium, obviously, in particular their encounter system, if you will, attempts to add a little more, I guess you could say, depth to the more dangerous situations your character might find yourself in, but it's all presented through text basically still. But it looks like they're trying to make it more interactive at least. And while it's not in the demo, there's also their sort of continuation of the thought cabinet system from Disco Elysium, this time with conditioning, that being that your spy is conditioned to bring out certain attributes, traits based on the things you choose to move forward with in that regard, that kind of thing. We don't see too much of that system here in the demo, but we know it exists at the very least, so the details are a little hard to talk about. But all in all, from all of that down to the way the game uses the world and stuff, I will say straight away Zero Parades feels a little more video gamey than Disco Elysium did, which I thought was especially noteworthy given how much the intro seems to be attempting to kind of mimic Disco Elysium's opening in particular, where you start as a confused character in a hotel room trying to get to the bottom of an overall assignment that you also have to kind of like figure out what that was because you don't have all the information, that kind of thing. So in many ways, it's kind of like the specifics are different, but the overall situations are in fact very similar. And I don't know if that comparison is really going to help them out with everything going on. But before you get to any of that, you start at the game's, I guess you could call it character creation, or perhaps stat allocation might be the better way to put it, because you'll pick from a few different presets in terms of how your stats are allocated. You can apparently make a custom character in the full game, but in the demo here, that's not an option. Basically, though, you are choosing how to split your stats between physical, emotional, and analytical. Of course, just marking how well you do with the associated 5 skills within each of those 3 little options. The higher these are, the more likely you are to pass those checks, of course, with the game's double 6-sided dice rolling system for when you make these checks or when they happen passively through like conversations and stuff. Now, what's especially interesting, though, is that as you use these or just engage in conversation generally, you'll build up fatigue, anxiety, or delirium for each individual grouping of skills. When you max those out, you'll be forced to take a loss to one of your skills. So if you raise fatigue to its maximum, you then have to lower down one of your sort of physical skills in that grouping. If you raise anxiety to maximum, you have to lower one of your skills in that grouping, that kind of thing. Now, to make that even more interesting, and I guess to make you more likely to actually have to engage with that system, when you make your skill checks, you can often choose to exert yourself. That is to say, basically get an extra die on the roll at the cost of, building up fatigue, anxiety, or delirium. You will also, of course, be raising these as you play. There are experience and levels that you'll be earning, and as you gain levels, you gain skill points to allocate towards these. And at the very least, I would be curious to see how this winds up in full when you're actually engaging with all of these systems at once, and if it ever feels like you're just maintaining a normal amount of these skills, or will it actually feel like you're making solid progression across the totality of the game. Though I suppose we'll have to wait and see on that one. Once you get done with that, however, story-wise, we are playing one Herschel Wilk. Herschel here goes by the alias of Cascade because you are in fact a spy that's been brought out of some sort of cold retirement, if you will, after an asset asked for you by name and will absolutely not talk to anyone else. You, however, weren't really told any of that, and so you find yourself in this little motel room type thing where you have to piece together what it is you're doing here, what they wanted from you, all while you're trying to shake off the past of your failures and re-enter the global spy network. In particular, you are a member of the Opera, as they call it, or the Operant, which is the group of spies working for what they call the Superbloc, a group of communists. As you try to get to the bottom of these mysteries, why were these people looking for you specifically? What were they embroiled in? Apparently you used to be friends with at least a few of them, and that's what caused you to get burned in the first place. And the Steam page describes all of that as getting tossed into the middle of a three-way power struggle involving all sorts of spies and the like, as you would probably imagine, proper espionage style. Now, much like Disco Elysium itself, each of these skills sort of chimes into the individual conversations that you are in to provide feedback, whether or not you pass the checks, that kind of thing. Though I will say right now, not all of this is voiced. I think there's some placeholder voice acting in there right now, or at least I hope it's placeholder. Some of it is rough, so you don't really see like the full effect of it, if you will. Gameplay-wise, however, much of it is what you would expect from basically any narrative game. You run around talking to people, following up on leads, and depending on the skills and things that are available to you, you will uncover different things and find different paths towards your goals. And you can already see some of that just directly in the demo itself by just kind of working through the different iterations of the characters you can play as. Now, of everything they've shown off in this demo, the thing that is of interest to me the most is their new encounter system, so to speak. Now, it's really not that complicated, to be honest, but when you find yourself in some sort of dramatic type of situation, like in what the demo shows off, you trying to avoid a gunman who knows who you are, you'll be able to make different narrative choices, and based on what your skills, probably pick the one that will hopefully go the best for you as you seek to resolve that encounter to your own benefit. Now, I will say that I don't think this is a terribly complicated system. It's basically probably going to come down to picking the option that leads you with the highest chance of success. But this is where I think exerting yourself and trying to potentially increase those odds in your favor can be an interesting system for a narrative game at the very least. But starting to sort of put all of that together and draw this to a close for what it is, I think Zero Parades has an incredibly long uphill battle in front of them. And believe it or not, I'm not even talking about the drama going on with the studio, though there is certainly that against them as well. No, what I'm talking about is more the fact that I think in many ways Disco Elysium was sort of lightning in a bottle. It's the type of thing that I'm just not super sure you could recreate even with a lot of effort, and it seems to be that that is what they're trying to do with Zero Parades, to the point where so much of this game seems to mirror Elysium directly, even with like elements of the opening and everything. And while there are certainly parts of this that are interesting, I think the espionage part of it is fairly interesting on its own. Like, we don't get a ton of spy stuff. I just don't know that that's going to be enough to carry this game once the initial sort of interest people have in it, and whether or not the game is any good following everything going on, is going to be enough to last them in the long term. I get the distinct feeling this might be a situation like we saw with Bloodlines 2 not all that long ago, where people are honestly more interested in the story behind the game than the game itself. But who knows, maybe they'll surprise us all and it'll be incredible or anything. But for the most part, as demos go, I've played plenty of worse things, to be sure. Either way though, we'll see what happens. Zero Parades is set to release sometime in 2026. It doesn't have an official release date or anything. I have a feeling I might wind up reviewing this game just out of morbid curiosity, as mentioned, but otherwise that's pretty much all I've got for you guys today. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.